My daughter died 22 months ago, and every month since then, I've driven across Hamilton to hand her husband $700 in cash. $700 I earned repairing burst pipes and replacing water heaters at 64 years old, with hands that stopped working properly about a decade before the rest of me caught up. I did it for my grandson. I did it because Celia would have wanted me to. Then my neighbor said something while I was scraping ice off my windshield, and the whole thing fell apart. Before I tell you what she said, let me ask, where are you watching from tonight? Drop a comment and tell me your city or your province. I read every single one. And one thing before we begin. Some details in this account have been adjusted slightly for privacy, but the lesson at the heart of it is completely real. Lyle Pemberton, retired plumber, 31 years with a commercial outfit in the East End of Hamilton. I took my pension at 62, then kept doing side work because my CPP and OAS combined don't quite cover what I'd call living. They cover surviving. There's a difference. My wife Jean is in a memory care facility on the mountain. She's been there 14 months. Early onset dementia, they called it at first. Then it stopped being early onset and just became her life. She still knows my face on good days. On bad days, she asks me when Celia is coming to visit. Those are the hardest days, because Celia isn't coming. Celia died on the 401 just east of Woodstock on a wet November night 22 months ago. A transport trailer crossed the center line. She was 31. She was everything. Her husband's name was Wes. They'd been married 4 years. Their son Milo, my grandson, was 5 years old when his mother died and is now 7, growing faster than I can keep track of. I see him every second Saturday when Wes allows it, which is never often enough and always on Wes's terms. 3 weeks after the funeral, Wes sat across from me at my kitchen table and laid out what he called the situation. Celia, he said, had co-signed a business loan for a friend who'd defaulted, $35,000. The debt had passed to her estate, which meant it was now his problem, which meant, the way Wes told it, it was going to affect Milo's stability, the apartment, the groceries, the after-school program. He slid a piece of paper across the table. A repayment schedule. $700 a month for 50 months. That would clear it. I looked at that number. $700 a month. I looked at the photograph of Milo on his phone. Then I looked at the piece of paper again. I'll start in January, I said. 22 payments later, here we are. The building where Wes and Milo lived was a newer mid-rise on Cannon Street. 15 floors, keycard entry, intercom system. The kind of place that costs $1,400 a month for a 2-bedroom. I paid for parking and took the elevator up to the 8th floor every third Friday with an envelope in my jacket pocket. Sometimes Milo answered the door and threw his arms around me. More often Wes answered, took the envelope with barely a nod, and told me Milo was busy. Last November, and I remember the exact date because it was the Friday after Remembrance Day, I handed over the envelope and asked if I could take Milo for lunch the next day. A Saturday. Tim Hortons, maybe a walk down by the waterfront. Something simple. Wes said Milo had hockey. I nodded. I said okay. I said I'd check in next week. He closed the door before I finished the sentence. I stood in the hallway for a moment, the hum of the elevator behind me, fluorescent lights doing that thing where they're just slightly too bright. I was thinking about Celia. I was always thinking about Celia in that hallway. On the way down in the elevator, something shifted in me. Nothing dramatic. Just a small, quiet thing I'd been ignoring for months. The kind of feeling you get when a pipe sounds wrong before it bursts. A low vibration that experienced hands recognize even when eyes can't see anything yet. I was chipping ice off my car the following Tuesday morning. We'd had a hard freeze overnight, and my scraper handle had cracked, so I was using an old spatula, which tells you where I'm at financially, when Ida Forsyth came out of the unit beside mine. Ida was 71, widowed, and had lived next to me for 9 years. She was the kind of neighbor who noticed things without seeming like she was looking. She brought her recycling out 3 times a week and always seemed to time it when something interesting was happening on the street. "Lyle," she said, "can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." She pulled her coat tighter. "Did Wes buy a new truck?" I stopped scraping. "Why?" "Because I saw him at the Ram dealership on Barton last week. He was signing papers on a brand new 1500. Crew cab. Red. The salesman was shaking his hand. She paused. I thought that was odd given what you've told me about his situation. I told her it was probably a lease. I asked my son, she said. He works in Fleet. He said the way Wes was signing, the length of the meeting, that wasn't a lease, that was a purchase. I didn't say anything. I just stood there holding my cracked ice scraper in the freezing air, looking at nothing. I might be wrong, Ida said. She didn't sound like she thought she was wrong. I called Hank Ossie the next morning. Hank and I had gone to Cathedral Secondary together back in 1978. He'd spent 27 years with Hamilton Police Service before retiring and setting up a small private firm out of a Dundas office. He did insurance fraud, missing persons, the occasional domestic situation. He was good at it. He was also one of the few people who knew the full story of what I'd been doing for Wes these past 2 years. Come by Thursday, he said. Bring the original paperwork. I brought it. I also brought the payment ledger I'd been keeping, an old spiral notebook where I logged every delivery, date, amount, the number of the month. It had started as a habit and become something closer to a ritual, or maybe evidence. I hadn't admitted that to myself until I set it on Hank's desk. He looked at the repayment schedule Wes had given me, looked at it for a long time. Who was the friend? He asked. The one who took out the business loan that Celia co-signed. I gave him the name Wes had told me, a man called Farrell who'd run a landscaping company in Ancaster. Hank typed something, waited, typed again. There's no registered business under that name in Ancaster in the last 5 years, he said. Or Hamilton, or Wentworth County. I heard the words, I understood them, but I sat very still. Let me make some calls, Hank said. He called me back Saturday afternoon. The debt doesn't exist, Lyle. I was sitting in my truck outside the nursing home. I'd just visited Jean. She'd had a bad day. She'd asked me twice about Celia, and I'd told her twice that Celia was fine, just busy. Send her your love. I hated lying to Jean. I'd been doing it for 22 months. Say that again, I said. There's no record of a business loan in Celia's name. A co-signed debt of that size would have shown up in probate. It didn't, because it wasn't there. He let that settle. The $35,000. Wes made it up. The nursing home's automatic doors opened across the parking lot. A PSW wheeled an older man out for some air. Everything looked ordinary and nothing felt real. There's something else, Hank said. Celia's employer group benefits. She had a life insurance rider through her work. 50 weeks of salary. Her salary was around $72,000. That's $69,200. Paid out to the named beneficiary 8 weeks after the accident. The named beneficiary was Wes. $69,000. And he'd come to my kitchen table with a piece of paper and a story about a debt. I gripped the steering wheel. My hands ached, but not from the cold. Before I tell you what we found next, I need to stop for a moment. If you're still with me right now, leave a comment. Just say I'm still here. That's all, because what comes next is the part that broke me open before it made me stronger, and I need to know you haven't left. A note. Some details in this account have been adjusted for privacy. The heart of it is true. If this kind of story isn't for you, no obligation to stay. But if you want to know what my daughter left behind for me to find, keep watching. The previous autumn, about 8 months before her accident, Celia had asked if she could store a document box in my basement. Just a banker's box, she said. Tax records and work files. She'd pick it up when they had more room. She never picked it up. After she died, I'd moved it twice without opening it. It had her handwriting on the side. Celia, come in. I left it on a shelf next to some old pipe fittings and the Christmas decorations. I went down to the basement that Saturday night, and I opened it. Tax returns, work contracts, a folder labeled benefits with her employment records, and at the very bottom of the box, a blue folder with a strip of masking tape on it. Written in her handwriting, Dad, read if something feels wrong. I sat down on the cold concrete floor with my back against the furnace. Inside the folder was a letter, 3 pages, handwritten, dated September 14th, 8 weeks before she died. Dad, I don't know if you'll ever need to read this. I hope you don't. But I've been keeping track of some things, and I'm not comfortable leaving it only in my head. Over the past 18 months, I've noticed cash withdrawals from our joint account that I couldn't account for. Always on Thursdays. Always between $400 and $800. When I asked Wes, he said it was for a business he was considering with a friend. He couldn't give me the friend's name consistently. It changed twice. I started writing the names down. They're in the attached sheet. I also opened a TFSA in your name at TD. The banking information is in this folder. I've been putting money aside quietly. Right now it has about $11,000. If something happens to me and things don't feel right, that money is for Milo. Don't let anyone tell you it doesn't exist. I also want you to know that I have a life insurance policy through work. Wes is the named beneficiary. I've been meaning to change it, but I keep putting it off. If I'm reading my gut wrong, none of this matters. But if I'm not wrong, if you're sitting somewhere reading this, because something went wrong, please look at where that money went. I love you, Dad. Take care of Milo. Take care of Mom. Celia. I stayed on that basement floor for a long time. She knew. Not everything, maybe. But enough to be afraid, and she'd tried to protect me, and she never said a word because she didn't want me to worry. My daughter, 31 years old, raising a little boy, quietly terrified, and still thinking about her parents. I held those 3 pages against my chest and I cried the way I hadn't cried since the night of the accident. Deep, wrecked sobs, the kind that come from somewhere below grief. Anger and sorrow arriving at the same moment, tangled up so tight you can't separate them. When I was done, I put the letter back in the folder and called Hank. By the following Wednesday, Hank had pulled together what he could. He had contacts from his years on the job. A retired detective at Financial Crimes who owed him a favor, a colleague who knew how to read records without crossing a line that would compromise a prosecution. What they found was thorough and ugly. Wes's account at Scotiabank showed my $700 deposited the same day I delivered it, every month without exception. The account also showed wire transfers in 12 months of deposits, $1,200 a month, from a numbered company registered in Ontario. Hank traced it to a holding account Wes controlled under a numbered company he'd incorporated in 2021, before Celia died. The life insurance payout, $69,000, had moved through 2 accounts before landing in a joint account between Wes and a woman named Sasha Belair. I'd never heard that name. Celia's RRSP, $43,000 that she'd been building for 8 years, had transferred to Wes as the named beneficiary. That money was also in the joint account. The joint account had been quietly draining for 6 months. Transfers to a Costa Rican bank. They'd already moved $62,000 offshore. Then Hank found the flights. Air Canada departing Toronto Pearson, Wes Darnell and Sasha Belair, one way to Calgary the coming Friday, connecting to Costa Rica 3 weeks after arrival. There was no ticket for Milo. I didn't sleep that night. I made tea I didn't drink and sat at my kitchen table and looked at the photograph of Celia on the wall, the one from her graduation, 23 years old, laughing, her mortarboard slightly crooked, because she'd put it on in a hurry. She always did things in a hurry. She had too much to do and not enough time. She was right about that in the end. In the morning I called Hank and said, "We need to go to the police." "Already drafted the summary," he said. "Hamilton Police Financial Crimes Unit. I know the sergeant." "There's one thing I need to do first," I said. "I need to see Wes. I want to be honest about why I went to that condo alone the following afternoon. It wasn't to give him a chance to explain. It was because I needed to see his face when I told him what I knew. After 2 years of handing over those envelopes while he barely met my eyes, I needed him to finally look at me. He answered the door in sweatpants. Milo was at school. The apartment looked different than it had 6 months ago. New couch, a large television mounted on the wall, 2 hard-shell suitcases near the bedroom door, expensive ones, the kind you see at Pearson on people who don't check prices, packed. I looked at the luggage, then at him. "Going somewhere?" I said. Something moved across his face, not guilt, calculation. "Family trip," he said, "quick thing." "To Calgary," I said, "then Costa Rica." The calculation stopped. His face went still. I sat down without being asked. He didn't stop me. "There's no business debt," I said. "There never was. Celia's friend Farrell and the landscaping company. None of it exists. You made it up. I set the blue folder on his coffee table. My daughter suspected you were hiding money. She opened an account in my name, so that if something happened to her, I'd have something for Milo. She wrote me a letter. She told me about the insurance policy and told me to look into it if things didn't feel right. He said nothing. The insurance money, $69,000. Celia's RRSP, $43,000. Transferred to a joint account with Shaw Belair. Already moving to Costa Rica in pieces. I looked at him steadily. I've given you $15,400 over 22 months. I worked through 2 winters doing side jobs to come up with that money. My wife is in a memory care facility. My daughter is buried in Woodland Cemetery, and you sat across from me with a piece of paper. He started to speak. I raised my hand. Don't, I said. Don't tell me about what you went through. I watched you at the funeral. I watched you at Christmas. And I handed you money every month, because I thought I was helping Milo. You used my grandson as a prop. You don't understand the pressure. I understand exactly what you are. I stood up. You let your wife's father pay down a debt that never existed, while you moved her life insurance into an account with another woman and booked a one-way flight. I held his gaze. Milo isn't on that flight, Wes? His jaw tightened. That's temporary. He'd join us. Hamilton Police Financial Crimes, I said. I'm meeting with them tomorrow morning. Everything Hank documented. Celia's letter, 22 months of payment records, all of it. I picked up the blue folder. My lawyer filed an emergency custody application this morning, I said, for Milo. I closed the door behind me. I'm not going to tell you I felt powerful walking back to my truck. I felt sick. The way you feel when you've done something necessary and true, and it cost you more than you expected. I sat in my old Silverado, the one with the rust creeping along the wheel well, and called Hank and told him it was done. He said, good, now let the system do its job. Hamilton Police made contact with Wes the following afternoon. By the time I sat down with the financial crime sergeant and a Crown prosecutor's liaison, Hank had submitted everything in a clean summary. The sergeant read through it and said, this is thorough. He said it the way experienced people say things when they're impressed and don't want to show it. Wes was arrested on a Thursday, 2 days before his Calgary flight. Fraud over $5,000. Breach of trust. The Crown added charges related to the movement of estate funds. The joint account with Sasha was frozen. She was interviewed and released. Family court granted interim custody of Milo to me that same Thursday. A social worker brought him to my house at supper time. He had his backpack and his hockey bag and a look on his face that I didn't quite know how to read. Not scared, exactly. More like someone who'd been carrying something heavy and had just been told he could set it down. He stood in my front hall and looked around, and then he said, can I sleep in the room with the glow stars? My old study has stick-on stars on the ceiling. I'd put them up for Celia when she was small, then added new ones when Milo started coming for overnight visits. I'd never taken them down. Yes, I said, that's your room. 4 months later, I sat in a Hamilton courtroom and watched Wes plead guilty to fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. His lawyer had negotiated. No trial. The judge sentenced him to 26 months. He was ordered to repay the full amount of the fraudulent payments, $15,400, and a court-appointed trustee would oversee the recovery of estate funds. $31,000 came back from the Costa Rican transfers after the bank cooperated. It wasn't everything. It was enough. In the hallway afterward, Hank shook my hand and didn't say much. He didn't need to. We'd been friends since we were 17, and we both knew when words were necessary and when they weren't. I drove to the nursing home. Jen was having a good day. She recognized me right away. Her face did that thing it does on good days, that small lift, like a curtain opening. I sat beside her and held her hand and looked out the window at the January snow settling on the parking lot. How's Milo? She asked. He's good, I said. He scored a goal in hockey last Saturday. She smiled. He gets that from Celia. She was always the determined one. She'd said that. Present tense. She said Celia was determined. I held her hand a little tighter and looked at the snow. She was, I said. She really was. In March, I opened a registered education savings plan for Milo at TD. The federal government matches contributions through the Canada Education Savings Grant. 20% on the first $2,500 you put in each year. I put in $5,000 the first year. Milo doesn't know yet where that money came from or what it cost. Someday he'll be old enough to understand the whole story, and I'll tell him. His mother left him a foundation. Even when she was frightened, I built on top of it. On a Saturday in April, I was replacing the wax ring on the bathroom toilet. It had been leaking for 2 months and I'd been putting it off, and Milo came in and asked what I was doing. I explained it. He watched for a while, then asked if he could hand me tools. I said yes. He handed me the adjustable wrench, like it was something important. "Did you teach my mom to do this?" he asked. "Some of it," I said. "She was better at drywall, not so patient with plumbing." He thought about that. "I want to learn plumbing. Then, I'll teach you." He nodded, serious about it, the way 7-year-olds are serious about things that actually matter to them. We visited Celia's grave in May when the ground had softened and the lilacs in the cemetery were just starting to open. Milo carried a small bunch he'd picked from the bush in our backyard. He stood at the stone for a while without saying anything. Then he said, "I think she would have been good at hockey too." "I think so," I said. He set the lilacs down carefully and stepped back and stood next to me. We stood there together in the spring light, two people who'd lost the same woman in different ways, doing our best to figure out what came next. What came next was we went home. I made dinner. We watched a period of the Leafs game. They lost, which is a very Canadian kind of disappointment to share with someone you love. And Milo fell asleep on the couch before the second intermission. I covered him with the quilt from the back of the chair and looked at him for a moment. He had Celia's jaw. He had Jean's eyelashes. He had something else that was entirely his own, something I didn't have a name for yet but intended to spend the next decade finding out. Celia tried to protect us even when she was afraid. The least I can do is make sure that everything she saved is still here when Milo is ready to receive it. To everyone watching tonight, if something feels wrong, trust that feeling. Ask the questions that make you uncomfortable. Look in the blue folder. Don't wait 2 years and $15,000 before you believe what your gut already knew. Protect the people who can't protect themselves yet. That's what we're here for. That's all we're ever really here for.